A third is that progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. There are lots of overnight tragedies. There are rarely overnight miracles. On January 5th, 1889, the Detroit Free Press pushed back against the long held dream that man could one day fly like a bird. Airplanes, the paper wrote, appear impossible. The smallest possible weight of a flying machine with the necessary fuel and engineer could not be less than 300 or 400 pounds, but there is a low limit of weight. Certainly, not much beyond 50 pounds, beyond which it is impossible for an animal to fly. Nature has reached this limit, and with her utmost effort has failed to pass it. 6 months later, Orville Wright dropped out of high school to help his brother Wilbur tinker in their backyard shed to build a printing press. It was the brothers' first joint invention. It would not be their last. If you had to make a list of the most important inventions of the 20th century, the airplane would be at least top 5, if not number 1. The airplane changed everything. It started world wars, it ended world wars, it connected the world, bridging gaps between cities and rural communities, oceans and countries. But the story of the Wright brothers' quest to build the first plane has a fascinating twist. After they conquered flight, no one seemed to notice. Nobody seemed to care. In his 1952 book on American history, Frederick Lewis Allen wrote, "Several years went by before the public grasped what the Wrights were doing. People were so convinced that flying was impossible that most of those who saw them flying about Dayton, Ohio in 1905 decided that what they had seen must be some trick without significance, somewhat as most people today would regard a demonstration of, say, telepathy." It was not until May 1908, nearly 4.5 years after the Wrights' first flight, that experienced reporters were sent to observe what they were doing. Experienced editors gave full credence to these reporters' excited dispatches, and the world at last woke up to the fact that human flight had been successfully accomplished. Even after people caught on to the plane's wonder, they underestimated it for years. First, it was seen mainly as a military weapon, then a rich person's toy, then perhaps used to transport a few people. The Washington Post wrote in 1909, "There will never be such a thing as commercial aerial freighters. Freight will continue to drag its slow weight across the planet Earth." The first cargo plane took off 5 months later. Now compare that slow, year-long awakening to becoming optimistic about the airplane to how quickly people pay attention to drivers of pessimism, like a corporate bankruptcy, or a major war, or a plane crash. Some of the first mentions of the Wright's plane came in 1908 when an army lieutenant named Thomas Selfridge was killed during a demonstration flight. Growth is driven by compounding, which always takes time. Destruction is driven by single points of failure, which can happen in seconds, and lots of confidence, which can happen in an instant. It's easier to create a narrative about pessimism because the story pieces tend to be fresher and more recent. Optimistic narratives require looking at a long stretch of history and developments which people tend to forget and take more effort to piece together. Consider the progress of medicine. Looking at the last year will do you little good. Any single decade won't do much better, but looking at the last 50 years will show something extraordinary. For example, the age-adjusted death rate per capita from heart disease has declined more than 70% since 1965, according to the National Institute of Health. A 70% decline in heart disease deaths is enough to save something like 500,000 American population. Picture the population of Atlanta saved every year, but since that progress happens so slowly, it captures less attention than quick, sudden losses like terrorism, plane crashes, or natural disasters. We could have a Hurricane Katrina 5 times a week every week. Imagine how much attention that would receive, and it would not offset the number of annual lives saved by the decline in heart disease in the last 50 years. This same thing applies to business, where it takes years to realize how important a product or company is, but failures can happen overnight. And in stock markets, where a 40% decline that takes place in 6 months will draw congressional investigations, but a 140% gain that takes place over 6 years can go virtually unnoticed. And in careers where reputations take a lifetime to build and a single email to destroy, the short sting of pessimism prevails while the powerful pull of optimism goes unnoticed. This underscores an important point made previously in this book. In investing, you must identify the price of success, volatility, and loss amid the long backdrop of growth and be willing to pay it. In 2004, the New York Times interviewed Stephen Hawking, the scientist whose incurable motor neuron disease left him paralyzed and unable to walk at age 21. Through his computer, Hawking told the interviewer how excited he was to sell books to lay people. Are you always this cheerful? The Times asked. My expectations were reduced to zero when I was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus, he replied. Expecting things to be great means a best case scenario that feels flat. Pessimism reduces expectations, narrowing the gap between possible outcomes and outcomes you feel great about. Maybe that's why it's so seductive. Expecting things to be bad is the best way to be pleasantly surprised when they are not, which ironically is something to be optimistic about. Now, a short story about stories.